this is an important thing. We have a mayoral election tomorrow in New York City, and Bill de Blasio, who's run a very progressive campaign, who this show has supported from the days when he was a asterisk in the polls. We were pushing for him when he was considered basically dead on arrival politically. Now it looks like he's on his way to something like a 40-point win over the Republican candidate Joe Lhota. And he has made the centerpiece of his campaign reforming radically Stop and Frisk. We've talked about Stop and Frisk on the show before. It's a policing tactic used in New York City. Aggressively targets young African and Hispanic men. And it basically, they'll use every word in the book to evade it, but it profiles them. It's a policy of taking people that fit certain profiles, pushing them around, police aggressively asking them. There's videos of young men who've secretly recorded interactions with police. They'll say something like, "Why is this the third time in the day you're stopping me? What have I done?" The police say, "Shut the F up. You look like an a-hole." Other types of really abusive and problematic things. And a couple of weeks ago, or actually a couple of months ago rather, over the summer, a New York judge, Shira Scheindlin, threw out Stop and Frisk and said it was unconstitutional in a pretty radical, actually shouldn't say radical, but a very smart, tough, well-reasoned decision where she just basically said, she cut through all the obfuscation and said Stop and Frisk is what it is. It's a policy. It's a policing tactic that is aggressive on certain communities because of their socioeconomic standing and race. And anybody could see that. Anybody who has any observation of the policy could see that. And it also, we should say, and I think this is important to bear in mind, it made Bill de Blasio's job a lot easier. Because when he gets elected mayor tomorrow, which I think he will, and we should all make sure that happens, people like us, our job is going to go from being, supporters to now, critical friends. We want Bill de Blasio to follow through on his commitments on inequality, on policing issues, on all of these areas where there are real problems in New York City. But when she threw out Stop and Frisk, that kind of that made it easy for him in some ways, because when he came into office, he could say, "Hey, I'm just implementing what this judge said," which is why this stunning and egregious move that an appeals court made last week is really, it's terrible and ridiculous in and of itself, but it puts heightened pressure on de Blasio to really see what kind of mayor he's going to be. And this appeals court basically threw out Scheindlin's decision and removed her from the case, which is pretty stunning, to actually remove a judge from the case. And the reason that they gave, this is according to a piece by Jeffrey Toobin, of all people, our old friend Jeffrey Toobin, entitled "The Preposterous Removal of Judge Scheindlin." So Jeffrey Toobin is right on this. He says, quote, "In a ruling today," this is from October 31st, so a couple days ago, "the appeals court said," and basically Scheindlin had spoken about her decision outside of in statements to the New Yorker, and has spoken publicly on her judicial reasoning. In a ruling today, the appeals court said Scheindlin's statement suggested that, quote, "her impartiality might reasonably be questioned," unquote. That would mean that the rights of the city have been violated, the city that was defending Stop and Frisk, and the lawsuit needed to be handed off to another judge immediately, and her decision overturned. She was chastised. And it's also important to say the Second Circuit Court took the action on its own. The city had not even requested that Scheindlin be removed. This is a move they made without any prompting to get her off of the case. Pretty stunning and radical move. And I think, look, it's very important we question, why is it that every time a judge in recent history who is accused of some form of activism, it's not, it's not Scalia making up some warped, incredible interpretation of the Second Amendment that doesn't stand up for historical scrutiny, and it's not judges in Texas reinstating some horrific abortion law. It's someone like this who just has mad at Judge Scheindlin, who's actually just spoken publicly and answered questions, frankly, on a decision that she already made. The legal process will continue on this, but again, I think this will be the first test of de Blasio, should he be elected mayor tomorrow, which I think he will be. He has to implement these reforms now without the legal cover. And this is an important test in some ways for progressive governance. We need to start seeing progressive reform happen through elected officials more and not rely on the courts, because as we know, the courts have gotten more and more right-wing through a series of Republican appointments, Republican judges. But it's also through Democratic and supposedly progressive politicians not following through on what they're really supposed to stand for. So Bill de Blasio was totally unequivocal about this. He ran a great campaign, and now it's time to step up, and it's going to be more challenging, but he needs to do it. And that will be the first thing that we should keep an eye out for when he becomes mayor.